The empty bottles were wrong. That was my first thought when I spotted them scattered around the base of the water tank, green glass catching the morning sun like broken teeth. Carlton Dry stubbies, maybe 6 or 7 of them, lying in the red dirt, like someone had been having a party. But there hadn't been a party, there hadn't been anyone. I'd been alone at the remote mining camp for 3 weeks now, doing survey work for the company. The nearest town was a 4-hour drive on roads that barely deserved the name. Nobody came out here without a good reason, and nobody had radioed ahead about any visits. I picked up one of the bottles and turned it over in my hands. The label was clean and bright, no weathering from the brutal Outback sun. These had to be fresh. Recent. The unease started as a small knot in my stomach. I'd worked remote sites before, spent months in places where you couldn't see another soul for weeks. I knew the sounds of isolation, the wind through the equipment, the tick of cooling metal, the distant cry of birds. These sounds had become my companions over the years. But now, something felt different, like the silence was watching me. I gathered up the bottles, tossing them in the rubbish bin near my caravan. Probably just some passing traveler who'd stopped for water and left their mess behind. People had no respect these days. The explanation felt thin, even as I told it to myself. My hands were shaking slightly as I dropped the last bottle into the bin. The metallic clang echoed across the empty campsite, unnaturally loud in the morning stillness. I found myself looking over my shoulder at the ridgelines, scanning for movement that shouldn't be there. That night I double-checked the locks on my equipment shed and made sure my rifle was loaded and within easy reach. I'd never been paranoid before, but those bottles had gotten under my skin. The way they'd been scattered, almost deliberately placed where I'd be sure to see them. Sleep came in fits and starts. Every small sound jerked me awake. A bird settling on the caravan roof, the generator cycling, the distant bark of a dingo. Normal sounds that now carried weight, as if each one might be masking something else. I woke before dawn to the sound of glass clinking in the wind. More bottles. This time arranged in a rough circle around my caravan, like some kind of shrine or warning. I counted 12 of them, all Carlton Dry, all fresh and clean. The morning air was cold enough to make my breath mist, but sweat beaded on my forehead as I stared at the deliberate arrangement. Someone had been here while I slept. Someone had crept around my campsite in the dark, placing bottles with the careful precision of a ritual. And I hadn't heard a thing. My hands shook as I gathered them up, the glass cold against my palms. Each bottle felt heavier than it should, weighted with implication. The labels were pristine, not a single fade mark or scratch. These weren't old empties someone had been carrying around. The isolation that had felt peaceful yesterday now pressed against me like a weight. The vast emptiness of the bush, the red rocks and scattered scrub stretching to the horizon in every direction. It had always been beautiful to me. Now it felt like a hiding place for threats I couldn't see. Every shadow could conceal someone watching. Every rise in the landscape could hide movement. I spent the day trying to focus on my work, taking soil samples and updating my survey maps. But my attention kept drifting to the ridgelines around the camp, scanning for movement. The theodolite felt foreign in my hands, the familiar routine of measuring and recording, disrupted by constant vigilance. Every few minutes I'd stop and listen, straining to hear sounds that didn't belong. The wind through spinifex grass, the distant call of a crow, the mechanical hum of my generator. All normal, but somehow charged with potential menace. By evening I'd made my decision. If someone wanted to play games, I'd be ready for them. I set up a small camp chair facing the equipment shed, positioned where I could see most of the campsite. My rifle lay across my knees, safety off, the metal cold against my palms. The moon was nearly full, giving decent visibility across the open ground around my caravan. The wait stretched into hours. My eyes burned from staring into the shadows, and twice I nearly dozed off before jerking awake with a start. Nothing moved except the wind-blown branches of a lone coolabah tree near the water tank. Its leaves rustled with a dry whisper that seemed to carry secrets. Then, just past midnight, something shifted near the ridge. Not movement exactly, more like a change in the darkness, a shadow that hadn't been there moments before. I held my breath, straining to see through the uncertain moonlight. The shadow shifted again, and I caught a glimpse of a human silhouette against the star-filled sky. Someone was definitely out there, watching me. My finger found the trigger of my rifle, but I didn't raise it, not yet. I wanted to see what this person would do, whether they'd come closer or just observe from a distance. My heart hammered against my ribs, loud enough that I worried the watcher might hear it across the still night air. The shadow remained still for what felt like an eternity. My legs cramped from sitting motionless, but I didn't dare shift position. One wrong move might spook whoever was out there, and I needed to know more about what I was dealing with. Then the shadow was gone, melting back into the landscape so smoothly that I wondered if I'd imagined it. But the feeling of being watched lingered, a physical presence that made my skin crawl. When dawn came, there were fresh boot prints in the sand near my water tank. Size 11 or 12, with a distinctive diamond tread pattern that was nothing like my own worn work boots. I crouched beside them, studying the depth and spacing. Whoever had made these tracks was tall, heavy, and moving with deliberate care. The prints circled the tank twice before heading off toward the rocky outcrop where I'd seen the shadow. I followed them as far as I dared, rifle in hand, but they disappeared into the hard-packed earth and stone. The trail vanished as if the person had simply evaporated. Someone was definitely out there, someone who knew the country well enough to move through it like a ghost. The question was what they wanted from me. That afternoon, more bottles appeared while I was working on the far side of the survey area. I'd been gone for maybe 3 hours, taking measurements near the old mine workings. When I returned, 24 stubbies were arranged in neat rows on the hood of my ute. The precision of the arrangement made my skin crawl. Each bottle had been placed with mathematical exactness, forming perfect lines that caught the afternoon sunlight. This wasn't random vandalism or drunken mischief. Someone was sending me a message, though I couldn't begin to guess what it meant. I gathered the bottles with growing anger, my movements sharp and aggressive. The glass clinked together as I shoved them into a plastic bag, the sound grating against my nerves. Playing games was one thing, but this felt like harassment, intimidation, like someone was trying to drive me away from the site. "Come on then," I shouted at the empty landscape, my voice echoing off the rocks. "Stop hiding like a coward and face me." Only silence answered. But I had the distinct feeling that somewhere out there, someone was listening. Watching. Maybe even laughing at my frustration. The thought made my face burn with humiliation and rage. That night I moved my sleeping bag into the equipment shed, barricading the door with a heavy toolbox. The metal walls felt like a trap, but at least it was a trap I controlled. If my mysterious visitor wanted to get close, they'd have to make some noise doing it. I barely slept, startling awake at every small sound. The shed groaned as the metal contracted in the cooling night air. Something scratched at the walls, probably just a possum or small wallaby, but every noise sent adrenaline shooting through my system, leaving me wide-eyed and trembling. When morning came, I emerged to find my generator silent and dead. The fuel line had been cut with surgical precision, diesel pooling in the red dirt beneath the motor like dark blood. My hand shook as I examined the damage. The cut was clean, made with a sharp blade. Whoever had done this knew exactly where to strike for maximum impact. Without the generator, my refrigeration unit would die within hours. The radio equipment would go silent. The lights that kept the darkness at bay would fail. But worse was yet to come. The locks on my main storage shed had been cut as well, the metal hasps snipped through with heavy-duty bolt cutters. The damaged metal showed bright scratches where the blades had bitten through. Inside, half my food supplies were gone, the good stuff. Canned meat, dried fruit, chocolate, coffee. Whoever had done this knew exactly what to take to cause maximum hardship. My fists clenched as I surveyed the damage. This wasn't harassment anymore. This was sabotage. Someone was systematically destroying my ability to survive out here. The bottles were everywhere now. Dozens of them scattered throughout my ravaged supplies like calling cards. Carlton Dry stubbies mocking me from every surface, their green glass catching the light like malevolent eyes. Each one placed with deliberate care, turning my campsite into a shrine to some twisted obsession. Fear crept up my spine like ice water. I'd been thinking of this as some kind of prank, maybe a local with too much time and too little sense trying to scare off the city mining company. But the calculated nature of the sabotage suggested something much darker. Someone didn't just want me gone, they wanted me helpless first. I checked my ute with trembling hands, expecting to find it damaged as well. The keys turned, and the engine started normally. Relief flooded through me, so intense it left me lightheaded. At least I still had a way out if things got worse. But I couldn't leave yet. My survey work was only half finished, and the company was expecting my preliminary report within the week. They'd invested serious money in this site assessment. Walking away early would probably cost me my job, and jobs like this weren't easy to find. Besides, running felt like giving in to whoever was playing these games. I'd never backed down from a fight in my life, and I wasn't about to start now. Even as I thought it, I knew it was pride talking. Stupid, dangerous pride that might get me killed. I spent the day creating an inventory of my remaining supplies and working on the generator. The fuel line could be repaired with parts from my toolkit, but it would take time. Time during which my unseen tormentor might strike again. As I worked, I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder. The feeling of being watched had intensified to an almost physical presence. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Every sound carried potential danger. My skin felt like it was crawling with invisible insects, and I couldn't shake the sensation that eyes were boring into my back. By afternoon, I'd managed to get the generator running again, though the repair was temporary at best. The diesel smell made me nauseous, or maybe that was just the stress eating at my gut. My hands were steady enough to work, but inside I was falling apart piece by piece. I was tightening the last connection when I heard the first rumble of thunder. Storm clouds were building on the horizon, dark and heavy with the promise of rain. In country this remote, storms could be deadly, washing out roads, flooding creek beds, turning the landscape into an impassable maze of mud and rushing water. If I was going to leave, it had to be now. I stood there with the wrench in my hand, watching the clouds build, higher and darker. The smart thing would be to pack up and get out while I still could, drive back to town and file a report with the police. Let someone else deal with whatever twisted individual was playing these games. But something held me back. Maybe pride, maybe stubbornness, or maybe the growing certainty that whoever was out there wouldn't just let me drive away. They'd had plenty of opportunities to damage my vehicle, but they'd left it alone. That suggested they wanted me here for some reason. The thought made my mouth go dry. As the storm clouds gathered overhead, I made my final preparations. I moved my most essential supplies into the caravan, secured everything that might blow away in the wind, and checked my rifle one more time. The weapon felt reassuring in my hands, solid and functional. Whatever was coming, I'd face it here. The first fat raindrops began to fall just as darkness settled over the camp. Within minutes, the drops became a steady downpour, then a torrential deluge that hammered against the caravan roof like bullets. The sound was deafening, drowning out everything else. I huddled inside, listening to the storm rage outside. The wind howled through the guy wires and rattled the aluminum walls. Lightning split the sky in brilliant flashes that turned the windows into sheets of white fire. Thunder followed seconds later, shaking the ground beneath the caravan. It was the kind of storm that could kill a man caught in the open, the kind that would wash away tracks and evidence, leaving no trace of whatever might happen in its wake. As if on cue, something heavy struck the side of the caravan. The impact made the whole structure shudder. I grabbed my rifle and peered through the rain-streaked window, but the darkness was absolute between lightning flashes. Whatever had hit the caravan might have been debris blown by the wind, or it might have been something else entirely. Another impact, this time near the door, then another at the back of the caravan. The rhythm was too deliberate to be wind-blown debris. Someone was out there in the storm, circling my shelter like a predator. I pressed myself against the wall beside the window, rifle ready. The metal was cold against my back, and I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs. Each impact sent vibrations through the structure, a methodical testing of my defenses. Between thunder crashes, I could hear something else. A voice, distorted by wind and rain but definitely human. Shouting words I couldn't make out over the storm's fury. The sounds continued for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Then silence, broken only by the gradually diminishing rain. The storm raged until dawn. I dozed fitfully in my chair, rifle across my knees, jerking awake at every sound. When the first gray light filtered through the windows, the rain had finally stopped. I stepped outside into the aftermath. Water dripped from everything, forming muddy pools across the campsite. The air felt clean but cold, carrying the bite of approaching winter. My breath misted as I surveyed the damage, and I pulled my jacket tighter against the chill. That's when I saw my ute. All 4 tires had been slashed, long, deliberate cuts that had left them completely flat. The vehicle sat like a wounded animal, listing to one side in the mud. My stomach dropped as the reality hit me like a physical blow. I was stranded. No phone coverage out here. The satellite phone was back in town for repairs. The nearest neighbor was over 100 kilometers away, and with the roads likely washed out from the storm, even walking wasn't an option. I circled the ute, looking for other damage. The engine appeared untouched, and nothing had been stolen from inside. This was about trapping me, not theft. Whoever was out there wanted me stuck in this place. The cuts in the tires were precise, made with a very sharp knife. Each slash was exactly the right length and depth to ensure the tire couldn't hold air. Professional work. Someone who knew what they were doing. "You bastard!" I shouted into the empty bush. My voice echoed off the rocks and died away into silence. No response. But somewhere out there, I knew my tormentor was listening, probably enjoying my frustration. The spare tire had been slashed too, along with the small emergency tire I kept under the tray. Even if I could patch one tire, I'd need at least 2 to risk the rocky track out. The realization settled on me like a physical weight. Fear lodged in my chest like a cold stone. This wasn't harassment anymore. This was deliberate isolation, cutting off my escape routes one by one. The question was why? What did this person want from me? I spent the morning trying to patch one of the tires with my repair kit, but the cuts were too long and deep. The rubber wouldn't hold even temporary repairs. By noon I'd given up and was considering my other options. Walking out was suicide in this country, especially with winter coming on. I could try to signal for help somehow, but who would see it? The mine company wasn't expecting me back for another week. They'd assume I was just taking my time with the survey work. That afternoon, I decided to search beyond my immediate camp area. If someone was playing games with me, they had to be staying somewhere nearby. The thought of venturing away from my camp made my skin crawl, but sitting still felt like waiting to die. I followed a rough track that led up and over the ridge behind my water tank. The going was slippery from the rain, and twice I nearly lost my footing on loose rocks. My boots squelched in the mud, and water seeped through the worn leather, but persistence paid off. Just beyond the crest, tucked into a natural shelter between 2 large boulders, I found it. A crude camp, built from my own stolen supplies. My blue tarp was stretched between the rocks for shelter, guy ropes tied with the precise knots I'd taught myself years ago. My missing gas burner sat on a flat stone next to several cans of my food. A sleeping bag that looked suspiciously like my spare was rolled up in the corner, still damp from recent use. And everywhere, scattered around the little campsite, were those cursed beer bottles. dozens of them, creating a green glass perimeter around the living space. But the camp was empty, recently abandoned by the look of it. The ashes in the small fire pit were still warm when I held my hand over them. The sleeping bag felt damp not just from rain, but from body heat. Whoever had been living here had left in a hurry, probably when they saw me climbing the ridge. I gathered up what supplies I could carry, anger burning in my chest. This confirmed everything. Someone had been systematically stealing from me, living off my preparations while playing twisted games with my mind. They were close enough to watch my every move, to know exactly when I'd be away from camp. The question was whether they were gone for good, or just hiding nearby. The answer came that night. I'd secured my recovered supplies in the caravan and was heating a can of beans on my camp stove when I heard the familiar sound of glass clinking against rock. Then another. And another. I grabbed my torch and rifle, stepping outside into the bitter night air. The temperature had dropped sharply after the storm, and frost was already forming on the puddles. My breath came out in white puffs as I swept the torch beam across the campsite. More bottles had appeared while I was inside, but this time they were arranged in a deliberate pattern, forming a perfect circle around my caravan. The green glass caught my torchlight like scattered eyes, reflecting the beam back at me with malevolent gleams. "I know you're out there," I called into the darkness. My voice carried a tremor I couldn't suppress. "I found your little camp. I know who you are now, but I didn't know, really, someone with access to my supplies. Someone who knew the country well enough to survive out here with basic gear. Someone with enough patience to play a long psychological game instead of just attacking outright." The bottles caught my torchlight like scattered eyes, reflecting the beam back at me. There had to be 30 or 40 of them now, all empty, all placed with deliberate care. The sight made my skin crawl and my stomach churn. I spent the next hour checking my perimeter but found no sign of my watcher. Whoever it was had become very good at staying invisible. But they were close. I could feel their presence like an itch between my shoulder blades. Every shadow seemed to conceal movement. Every sound carried potential threat. The wind through the equipment made the metal ping and groan. A night bird called from somewhere near the water tank. All normal sounds that now felt loaded with menace. Sleep came in short, restless bursts. Every sound jerked me awake, hand reaching for the rifle. The wind through the mining equipment. A bird calling in the distance. The creak and pop of the caravan cooling down. All normal sounds that now carried the weight of potential threat. By morning, my food situation had become critical. Between what had been stolen and what I'd managed to recover, I had maybe 3 days of supplies left. The cold was getting worse too. Without proper heating, the caravan felt like a metal box designed to suck the warmth from my body. I was checking my remaining fuel when I saw the smoke. A thin column rising from beyond the next ridge, maybe 2 kilometers away. Someone had built a fire in broad daylight, confident enough to risk the visibility. Or maybe wanting to be seen. I studied the smoke through my binoculars, trying to gauge the location. It seemed to be coming from the old workings on the eastern side of the lease, where the previous mining crew had left some basic infrastructure. There might be shelter there, maybe even supplies. But it could also be a trap. The smoke continued for about an hour, then stopped abruptly. No gradual dying down like a normal fire burning out. Someone had deliberately extinguished it, which meant they knew they were being watched. That evening, I saw it again. This time closer, coming from a spot that should have been empty scrubland. The smoke rose straight up in the still air, a clear signal in the gathering dusk. "Come and find me," it seemed to say. Hunger made the decision for me. My remaining food wouldn't last another day, and the cold was sapping my strength faster than I'd expected. My hands shook when I tried to work, and my thoughts felt sluggish and unclear. If there was a chance of finding supplies or shelter, I had to take it. I waited until full dark, then made my way toward where I'd seen the smoke. Navigation was tricky by torchlight, but I'd studied the area during the day and had a rough idea of the route. The ground was still muddy from the storm, making every step a potential slip. My boots squelched in the saturated earth, and cold water seeped through the worn leather. Branches caught at my clothes, and twice I walked into spider webs that stuck to my face like cold fingers. It took me nearly 2 hours to cover the distance. When I finally reached the spot, I found the remains of a campfire built in a small clearing. But like the abandoned shelter, this camp was empty. The ashes were still warm when I held my hand over them. Whoever had built the fire had been here recently, maybe watching me approach and slipping away at the last moment. And scattered around the cold fire pit were more bottles, arranged in the same circular pattern I'd found around my caravan. It was becoming clear that this wasn't just about supplies or territory. Someone was playing an elaborate psychological game, using the bottles as calling cards or markers. The question was what they wanted from me, and how far they were willing to take things. The walk back to my camp felt like the longest journey of my life. Every shadow could hide a threat. Every sound made me freeze and listen. My torch beam seemed pathetically weak against the vast darkness surrounding me. By the time I reached my caravan, I was exhausted and shaking from more than just the cold. My water supplies were running low too. The tank had been adequate for normal use, but stress and fear made me thirsty. I'd been rationing since the day before, allowing myself small sips that barely wet my mouth. The bottles around my caravan had been rearranged while I was gone. Now they formed a tighter circle, closing in like a noose. The message was unmistakable. The net was tightening. I gathered up as many bottles as I could carry and hurled them into the darkness, hearing them smash against rocks. The sound was satisfying but hollow, like breaking waves against a stone shore. I knew more would appear by morning. Inside the caravan, I tried to make my remaining food last by eating only a few spoonfuls at a time. The hunger was constant now, a gnawing ache that made it hard to think clearly. Combined with the cold and the psychological pressure, I could feel my judgment starting to slip. That's when I began to wonder if this was the point. Not to kill me quickly, but to break me down slowly. To drive me to the edge of sanity before finishing whatever sick game was being played. The thought terrified me more than any direct physical threat could have. The morning brought another arrangement of bottles, this time spelling out letters, G-O. I stared at them for a long time, trying to convince myself they were random. But the letters were too clear, too deliberately formed. Someone was spelling out words. Telling me to go. To leave. The problem was I couldn't leave. Not with slashed tires and no working radio. I was trapped here until someone came looking for me, which could be weeks away. Fighting off waves of dizziness from hunger, I forced myself to think. There had to be something I was missing. Some clue about who was doing this and why. The bottles themselves were Carlton Dry, with labels that looked years old. Not recent purchases, but stock that had been stored somewhere. That's when I remembered the old mining hut I'd passed on my first day. I'd dismissed it as abandoned, but maybe there were records inside. Information about previous workers or incidents, anything that might explain what was happening. The hut was a 20-minute walk through scrubland that scratched at my legs. When I reached it, the door hung open on rusted hinges. Inside, everything was coated in dust and spiderwebs. The air smelled of rust and decay, with an underlying chemical odor that made my nose burn. But in the corner sat a metal filing cabinet, its drawers warped but still functional. The first drawer contained routine paperwork, shift rosters, equipment logs, safety reports. Nothing unusual. But the second drawer held incident reports dating back 15 years. As I flipped through them, a pattern emerged that made my blood run cold. Worker disappeared, March 2019. Last seen at Remote Camp 7. Personal effects found. Vehicle intact. No trace of individual. Worker missing. August 2021. Failed to report for shift. Camp abandoned. Supplies untouched. Individual never located. Suspected walkabout. January 2023. Worker with history of mental health issues vanished from isolated posting. Search called off after 2 weeks. Page after page of similar reports, all from remote camps. All involving single workers who simply vanished without explanation. The mining company had written them off as accidents, walkabouts, or workers who'd simply quit without notice. But I could see the real pattern now. Someone had been out here for years, picking off isolated workers one by one, and now it was my turn. My hands shook as I flipped to the last report. The date was only 8 months ago. A worker named Dave Collins had been posted to this exact location. The report was brief. Failed to maintain radio contact. Vehicle found abandoned. Tires slashed. Personal effects scattered. Individual presumed to have walked out due to psychological distress. Case closed. My vision blurred as I read the words. Dave Collins hadn't walked out. He'd been hunted, just like all the others. And whoever had taken Dave was still out here, still playing the same sick game with bottles and psychological torture. A sound outside made me freeze. Footsteps crunching on gravel, moving slowly around the hut. The steps were deliberate, unhurried, like someone who had all the time in the world. I stuffed the reports into my jacket and looked around for another way out. There was a window on the far side, partially boarded up. The boards looked rotten enough to break through if I had to. The footsteps stopped directly outside the door. I held my breath, pressed against the wall beside the window. Through a gap in the boards, I could see a figure standing in the doorway, tall, wearing clothes that had once been work gear but were now filthy and torn. The man's hair was long and matted, his face hidden in shadow. "I know you're in there." The voice was rough, unused to speaking. "Found my files, did you? Wondering about all those other fellas." My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it, the confrontation I'd been dreading. "They thought they could just waltz in here," the voice continued. "Set up camp in my home like they owned the place. But this is my territory now, been mine for years." The figure stepped into the hut. In the dim light I could see he was holding something, a long piece of metal pipe, rusted, but still solid. His face was gaunt, eyes wild with the look of someone who'd been alone too long. "You're the one who's been taking my things," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. The man laughed, a harsh sound like glass breaking. "Your things? Nothing here belongs to you, mate. This is my camp, my water, my supplies. You're just another trespasser who needs to learn some respect. The mining company sent me here. I have a right to." "The mining company?" the man spat. "They dumped me here 5 years ago and forgot I existed. Stopped sending supply trucks, stopped checking on me. Left me to die in this place." His grip tightened on the pipe. "But I didn't die, I adapted, and now I make sure nobody else takes what's mine." I could see the madness in his eyes, the complete break from reality. Years of isolation had twisted him into something barely human. His clothes hung on his skeletal frame, and his skin had the leathery look of someone who'd been in the sun too long. "You've been killing people," I said quietly. "Killing?" The man tilted his head like a curious bird. No, I give them choices. They can leave, find their own way out. Or they can stay and play my little games until they understand who's really in charge here." His smile was horrible, revealing broken teeth. Some of them chose poorly. My muscles tensed. The window was 3 steps away, but the boards would slow me down. The man was between me and the door. There was no good option. "You slashed my tires. Took my food. You wanted me to starve. I wanted you to leave," the man roared, raising the pipe. "But you're stubborn, aren't you? Just like Dave." He lasted 6 days before he tried to fight back. Didn't end well for him. The mention of Dave Collins snapped something inside me. This madman had tortured and probably killed an innocent worker, and now he planned to do the same thing again. "Where's Dave now?" I demanded. The man's grin widened. "Dave's part of the landscape now, feeding the birds out past the old mine shaft. You'll be joining him soon enough." I lunged for the window, driving my shoulder into the boards. They splintered and gave way, but not before the man swung the pipe. It caught me across the back, sending white-hot pain shooting up my spine. I tumbled through the broken window onto the ground outside. Pain shot through my back, but adrenaline kept me on my feet. I rolled and came up running, hearing the man curse and scramble after me through the window. The chase was on. My knowledge of the mine workings became my lifeline. While the madman knew the surface territory, I'd studied the underground maps during my brief time here. I led the pursuit toward the old processing plant, where concrete structures and rusted machinery created a maze of hiding spots. Behind me, I could hear the man crashing through brush, muttering to himself. "Can't run forever, mate. I know every inch of this place, every rock, every tree. You're just delaying the inevitable." My lungs burned as I ran, and the pain in my back made every step agony. But fear kept me moving, pumping adrenaline through my system like rocket fuel. I ducked behind a concrete wall and tried to catch my breath. My back throbbed where the pipe had hit me, and exhaustion was making my legs shake. The man was right. This couldn't go on much longer. He had the advantage of knowing the terrain, and I was already running on empty. But then I remembered something from the mining reports. The old processing plant had an underground maintenance tunnel that connected to the main mine shaft. If I could reach it, I might be able to double back to the hut while the madman was still searching the surface. The tunnel entrance was hidden behind a rusted steel door that took all my strength to open. The hinges screamed in protest, the sound echoing across the empty landscape. I slipped inside just as I heard footsteps approaching my hiding spot. The tunnel was pitch black and smelled of decades-old chemicals. I felt my way along the wall, moving as quickly as I dared. Water dripped somewhere ahead, and my footsteps echoed in the confined space. The air was thick and hard to breathe, making my chest tight. Behind me I heard the steel door bang open. "Clever," the madman's voice echoed in the tunnel. "But you're just trapping yourself down here. Only one way out, and I'll be waiting." I pressed on, hoping my memory of the mine layout was accurate. The tunnel should connect to the main shaft, which had an exit near the equipment shed. From there, I could circle back to the hut and hopefully find something to use as a weapon. The tunnel began to slope upward. Fresh air touched my face, carrying the scent of eucalyptus. I was getting close to the surface. Behind me the footsteps had stopped. Either the man had given up the chase, or he was being very quiet. I emerged from the tunnel behind the equipment shed, exactly where I'd hoped. But my relief was short-lived. The madman was waiting for me, leaning casually against the shed wall. "Predictable," the man said, hefting the metal pipe. "Dave tried the same trick. You mine workers all think alike." I looked around desperately. The hut was 50 meters away across open ground, too far to run. But there was a pile of mining equipment beside the shed. Picks, shovels, lengths of cable. "You can't keep doing this," I said, edging toward the equipment. "Eventually someone will investigate. The company will send search teams." The man laughed. "They haven't yet, and I'm very good at making people disappear. The bush is hungry, mate. It swallows up all kinds of things." I grabbed a pickaxe from the pile. The weight felt good in my hands, solid and reassuring. The wooden handle was worn smooth from years of use. "Stay back. I don't want to hurt you, but I will if I have to." "There we go," the man said approvingly. "Now you're thinking like a survivor, but you're not the first to try fighting back. Won't be the last either." He rushed forward, swinging the pipe in a wide arc. I blocked with the pickaxe handle, the impact sending vibrations up my arms. The two weapons locked together for a moment, both men straining against each other. The madman was stronger, but I was better fed and less exhausted by years of rough living. I managed to twist the pickaxe free and swing it toward the man's legs. The pointed end caught him in the thigh, tearing through his filthy pants and opening a deep wound. The man howled and stumbled backward. "You little bastard. I was going to make it quick, But now you're going to suffer like the others." He came at me again, but this time his leg gave out partway through the attack. He went down hard, the pipe rolling away across the ground. I stood over him, the pickaxe raised, breathing hard. "It's over," I panted. "No more games, no more bottles." The man looked up at me with pure hatred. "You think you've won? This place will drive you mad long before rescue comes." The isolation, the silence. It gets into your head and never leaves. "You'll end up just like me." I kept the pickaxe ready while I backed toward the hut. "Maybe. But I won't end up like Dave Collins." Inside the hut, I found what I'd been hoping for, an old radio unit mounted on the wall. It looked ancient, but functional, the kind of equipment that was built to last. I turned it on and was rewarded with static. I adjusted the frequency until I picked up a clear channel, my hands shaking as I worked the controls. "Mayday, Mayday. This is Gatch Top at Remote Mining Camp 7. I need immediate assistance. Medical evacuation required." The response came within minutes. A calm voice from the Regional Emergency Center, asking for my location and the nature of my emergency. I explained the situation as best I could while keeping watch on the injured man outside. "Help is on the way," the radio operator assured me. "Medical helicopter will be there in 40 minutes. Police are also being dispatched." "Are you in immediate danger?" I looked out at the madman, who was now sitting against the equipment shed, holding his wounded leg. The fight had gone out of him, replaced by a vacant stare. "Not anymore," I replied. "But send the police anyway. There are other victims out here, people who've been missing for years." The helicopter arrived exactly when promised, its rotor wash scattering the bottles around the camp like autumn leaves. I watched from the hut doorway as 2 paramedics jumped out, followed by a police officer who surveyed the scene with practiced eyes. The madman, Marcus, he'd finally given his name during the long wait, sat quietly now, his leg bandaged with torn fabric from my shirt. "You're Gatch Top." The officer approached, hand resting casually on his radio. "I'm Sergeant Williams. Hell of a situation you've got here." I nodded, suddenly feeling the weight of the past week crushing down on me. "There's more than just Marcus." He mentioned others. "Dave Collins for sure, probably more." Williams glanced at Marcus, who was being loaded onto a stretcher. The man's eyes had that same vacant stare, but he wasn't fighting anymore. "We'll get a full statement from you once you're checked out. But yeah, we've had reports over the years. Missing persons in remote camps. Never had a suspect before." The paramedic checking my vitals shook his head. "You're dehydrated and malnourished, but nothing that won't sort itself out with proper food and rest. Lucky man, all things considered." Lucky. I almost laughed at that. I'd spent 7 days convinced I was losing my mind, then another day fighting for my life. But as I watched Marcus being loaded into the helicopter, I realized the paramedic was right. How many others had faced the same situation without my knowledge of the mine workings, without finding that radio? "The other victims," I said to Williams. Marcus mentioned specific names, said he made it quick for some but not others. Williams nodded grimly. "We'll get everything out of him. Mental health evaluation first, but this looks like it's been going on for years. You might be the first one to make it out alive." The helicopter lifted off with Marcus and 1 paramedic aboard. The remaining paramedic had wanted me to go too, but I'd insisted on staying long enough to help with the investigation. Now, watching the aircraft disappear over the ridge, I wondered if that had been smart. The camp felt different with other people around, but the isolation was still there, waiting. "How long do you think he's been out here?" I asked. Williams was examining the makeshift camp where Marcus had been living. "Hard to say, could be decades. These remote mining operations, sometimes people just disappear and no one knows for weeks. Perfect hunting ground for someone like him." We spent the next 2 hours going through Marcus's possessions. The man had kept trophies, wallets, watches, personal items that painted a grim picture of his victims. Dave Collins's mining ID was there, along with at least 6 others, all men who'd come to work isolated camps and never made it home. The bottles, I said, holding up one of the empties. What was that about? Williams shrugged. Mental illness takes strange forms. Maybe it was his calling card. Maybe it helped him keep track of his kills. We'll probably never know for sure. The second helicopter arrived as afternoon shadows started growing long. This one carried crime scene investigators and a psychiatrist who would handle Marcus's initial evaluation. I found myself pushed to the sidelines as professionals took over my camp, photographing everything, bagging evidence. You ready to get out of here? Williams asked. We can finish your statement back in town. I looked around the camp one more time, my water tank, where it all started, the generator shed where my supplies had been stolen, the rocks where I'd first seen those impossible boot prints. A week ago, this had been my temporary home. Now it felt like a graveyard. Yeah, I said, I'm ready. The flight back to civilization took 20 minutes, but it felt like traveling between worlds. Below us, the bush stretched endlessly in all directions. Thousands of square miles of empty land where someone could disappear without a trace. How many more Marcus types were out there? How many camps had stories like this, but no survivors to tell them? At the regional police station, I spent 3 hours giving my statement. Every detail I could remember, from that first morning discovering the bottles to the final confrontation. Williams recorded it all, occasionally asking for clarification or additional details. You mentioned he said there would be others, Williams noted. Other people like him? I nodded. That's what he said, that I wouldn't be the last to try fighting back, like this was part of some pattern. Could have been just trying to scare you. But we'll follow up on it, check other remote operations, see if there are similar reports. When we finished, Williams walked me to the lobby where a social worker was waiting. Standard procedure, he explained, someone to help you process what happened, trauma counseling, victim support services. The social worker was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a gentle manner. She explained the services available, gave me pamphlets about post-traumatic stress, set up appointments for follow-up care. All of it felt surreal after a week of pure survival mode. The important thing to remember, she said, is that what happened to you wasn't normal. Your reactions, whatever they are completely valid. Some people think they should just bounce back from something like this, but that's not realistic. I nodded, though I wasn't sure how I felt yet. Relieved, certainly. Exhausted. But also, strangely empty. Like the adrenaline that had kept me going, had taken everything else with it, when it finally faded. That night, in a motel room paid for by the mining company's insurance, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Every small sound made me tense, the heating unit cycling on and off. Footsteps in the hallway. Voices from the room next door. After a week of hypervigilance, my nervous system didn't seem to know how to stand down. I thought about Marcus, now in a secure psychiatric facility undergoing evaluation. The man had probably been someone's son once. Maybe someone's friend or brother. What had driven him to years of isolated madness? Was it the bush itself, as he'd claimed, or something deeper? The next morning brought a call from my supervisor at the mining company. Gotch? Jesus, we heard what happened. How are you holding up? I'm okay, I said automatically, though I wasn't sure it was true. Listen, take all the time you need. Full pay, of course. And when you're ready to come back, we'll make sure you're never on a solo assignment again. What happened to you? That's not something anyone should have to face alone. I appreciated the sentiment, but I wondered if I'd ever be ready for another remote assignment. The idea of being alone in the bush, even for legitimate work, made my skin crawl. Over the next few days, the story broke in the media. Mining camp stalker, captured after week-long ordeal. Lone worker survives serial killer's bush trap. The headlines made it sound like an adventure story, but I knew the reporters had missed the real horror. It wasn't the dramatic confrontation or the physical danger. It was the slow erosion of sanity, the creeping certainty that I was alone and helpless in an indifferent landscape. Williams called with updates as the investigation progressed. Marcus had confessed to 7 murders over 12 years, all isolated mining workers. His mental state was deteriorating rapidly in custody, and doctors weren't optimistic about getting much more useful information from him. "We found 3 more remains," Williams reported during one call. "Shallow graves about 2 miles from your camp. Dental records confirmed 2 of them. The families finally have some answers." Some answers, but not closure. Never really closure for something like this. A month later, I was back at work, but in the company's main office handling logistics and supply coordination. No more remote assignments as promised. My colleagues were supportive but awkward, unsure how to treat someone who'd survived something so extreme. I became the guy who got stalked by that psycho, defined by the worst week of my life. The trauma counseling helped, slowly. I learned techniques for managing anxiety and hypervigilance, practiced mindfulness exercises to stay grounded in the present moment. Gradually, the constant feeling of being watched began to fade. But sometimes, late at night, I'd think about Marcus's words. "This place will drive you mad long before rescue comes." The isolation, the endless silence, the way empty landscapes could make a person feel utterly insignificant. Marcus had been wrong about me, but he hadn't been wrong about the bush itself. There was something out there in all that emptiness, something that could break a person if they weren't careful. Not a monster or a ghost, just the terrible weight of being truly alone. Most people never faced it directly, surrounded as they were by cities and communities and constant connection. But it was always there, waiting in the spaces between human settlements. Marcus had fallen into that emptiness and become something inhuman. Others had simply vanished, consumed by it entirely. I'd survived, but I'd felt its pull. The way madness could seem almost reasonable when you were cut off from everything familiar and safe. I never went back to remote work, never spent another night alone in the bush. Some might call it letting fear win, but I knew better. I'd looked into an abyss and managed to climb back out. That was enough heroism for one lifetime. The bottle still appeared in my nightmares sometimes, scattered around impossible locations like breadcrumbs leading deeper into darkness. But I always woke up in my own bed, in my small apartment in town, surrounded by the comfortable sounds of other people living their normal lives. And that was exactly where I intended to stay. If you've ever driven the long road at night, you know the silence. Hit like and subscribe. More stories are coming.